Good morning, everyone, and welcome to BPD Fest 2024. Before we jump into our panel today on BPD research and recovery, we just want to share a little bit about Emotions Matter and our mission. So Emotions Matter is a nonprofit organization founded in 2015 to support, educate, and advocate for people with borderline personality disorder. Our vision is to create a world in which every person with BPD has access to treatment and resources to achieve a meaningful recovery. Our website is www.emotionsmatterbpd.org, and here you could learn about our staff, learn about the resources and supports and programs that we offer, such as our peer support groups, and also upcoming events that we may have. A little bit about our philosophy. Emotions Matter strives to create a safe and judgment-free space for people with borderline personality disorder. We accept that there's a spectrum of experiences within the BPD community. We honor where people are on their journey without judgment or assumptions. We encourage people to find their own path towards recovery, and we speak as experts of our own lived experiences and not as medical experts. And just some guidelines for today's discussion. We ask that any questions that you may have during the session to please drop them and share them in the Q&A box and not the chat. You can make comments in the chat box, but if you would like a question to be answered by the panelists, please make sure to drop that in the Q&A box. Second, we accept difference and promote acceptance, especially with regards to gender, sexual orientation, identity, race, ethnicity, age, religion, disability, or politics. We also ask that you please avoid any explicit expressions of self-harm or trauma, as they may be upsetting to others. And all the panel and plenary sessions will be recorded and also available for the conference. After the conference, we ask that you do not take screenshots or recording on personal devices. These will all be accessible and available afterwards. Just some safety guidelines as well before we start off today. If at any time during BPD Fest you find yourself overwhelmed or struggling for any reason in need of support, we encourage you to reach out to your support system. Audience members may experience intense and painful emotions, feelings, memories, thoughts, and or reactions to any of the content that we share today. So we ask that you please participate at your own risk. You're also welcome to take a break at any time from BPD Fest or withdraw from it entirely. And in the event of a medical, including a mental health emergency, please seek care through a doctor, hospital, or emergency call numbers such as 988 or 911 in the United States immediately. And on Sunday, June 2nd, we will be having our annual walk for BPD. The walk will be taking place at Hudson River Park in New York City between 9:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. This will be an opportunity to connect with other people, hear stories, learn a little bit more about Emotions Matter. This will also be broadcasted so people can join in virtually as well. So for more information on this walk or for registration, you can go to our website, emotionsmatterbpd.org. You can also donate, and all donations fund Emotions Matters programming that serve the community and serve people with BPD. And without further ado, I would love to introduce our panelists today, Sophie Liljedahl, who is an associate professor in psychiatry at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, which is part of the Department of Psychiatry and Neurochemistry. Sophie is also the lead clinical researcher for both the National Medical Care Unit for Severe Self-Harm Behavior and the Center for Personality Disorders in Gothenburg, Sweden. Her research interests are suicide prevention, self-harm, personality disorders, and the evidence-based and emerging treatments. So today she'll be talking a little bit about BPD research around recovery. So thank you so much, Sophie, for joining us.
Thank you, Natalie, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my slides with you. Let's see. Share. We'll go into window and let's see. Do you see the slides
Not
in
yet.
full screen?
Now we
Great.
do.
Okay. Perfect. So I am going to spend some time with you discussing a study that I've conducted here in Gothenburg with my collaborators about understanding what makes life worth living and more, really getting into the experiences of what recovery means for people with histories of self-harm and suicidal behavior, including a BPD diagnosis. So before I hop into my slides, I think I'll just say a quick word about my background, which is related to this study. So I'm Canadian. I'm from Ontario, and I did all my education and licensing there. I'm still a licensed psychologist in Ontario. I moved to Sweden for what was going to be a year in 2012 because there was a national self-harm project that was initiated there, where a lot of resources were put into better, it was about creating knowledge and improving treatment for and related self-harm and related difficulties. And so I thought I'd come for a year. It was 2012, and the work was just more and more came, and it was so interesting that 1 year became 5 years, 10, and this summer it will be 13 years. But I wanted to mention the National Self-Harm Project because this was initiated by a collaboration between the government, between healthcare, and very importantly, it was initiated by SHADO, which is the Self-Harm and Eating Disorder Organization here in Sweden. So really a lot, I think, very similar to Emotions Matter in the United States. And SHADO was instrumental in getting that project launched here in Sweden. And they were very much involved in all of the work that went into the National Self-Harm Project. So when I collaborated with the National Self-Harm Project, this was like in 2012 to 2014, every Friday for 2 years, I met with, at that point, we called ourselves the Southern Node within the country. And I had the honor and the pleasure of spending every Friday with my working group, which included this representative from SHADO. And what I saw, she joined us right after she finished her treatment, and at the beginning of our collaboration, I can say she was barely there. She spoke in a very, very soft voice and took up very little space. And then over this 2 year collaboration, post-treatment for her and being involved in her life, I saw her really stepping into and taking possession of her physical self, her thoughts, and she had fantastic things to say. She really moved things forward in important ways. And then at the end of the 2 years, that was the end of the first phase, the development phase of the National Self-Harm Project, she was too busy fulfilling her dreams to continue, which I think is always what you want to see, is when people's lives get bigger and bigger, that they are moving on to be closer to realizing their dreams, which was the case for her. And I remember thinking, watching this transformation in her, why haven't I read more about that in the research literature? We've stayed in touch as acquaintances after that. It's going on 13 years that I've known her socially as well. And she's got a fabulous life, fulfilled in every way. She's living the dreams that she had. And again, this question of, is she either absolutely remarkable or maybe do we not ask the right questions to understand this process fully in folks who have histories or who have current borderline personality disorder? So I got very curious about the experience of recovery, what that means, as well as really understanding this life worth living construct, which I will share with you right now. So within the dialectical behavior therapy literature, as we all know, anyone who's well-versed in DBT will recognize life experienced as worth living, which for the purpose of our presentation, I'm just going to refer to as life worth living. And Marcia really placed this in DBT as kind of the end of treatment when you have freedom from the chaos of the disorder. But it's less clear how those who've received DBT for BPD and related suffering define that concept themselves. So usually in research, you want to have a very clear definition of what it is that is a target, as we do with the rest of a lot of behavioral and a lot of, I mean, this is part of Marcia's brilliance, was putting words on very complicated experiences often that were hard for everyone to understand. The life worth living construct, however, is not so very clearly defined. So again, this life worth living is a desired endpoint in treatment with DBT, but at the moment, and still now, we don't really have this definition of life worth living, which from our research and other perspectives clinically too, it can be a little bit tricky because it becomes difficult for us to know whether and when people attain a life they experience as worth living. Because usually what you want to do in research and in practice is have a very clear criteria, clear definition, a clear, we call it operational definition, so that something, an idea is so, and I'll stick to the word clear, that other people could do what you did and find a similar result within the parameters as you define them. So we don't quite have that for a life worth living. And that gets tricky because life worth living, for those who complete treatment, they might not recognize if they have a life worth living, if it's not clearly defined, or they might be missing that as part of their experience. So we don't know to what extent those who complete DBT have a life worth living. That's unknown in the research literature to date, and that's problematic if a life worth living is what we promise people at the outset of treatment. So symptom remission is a usual standard. I think it's important for me to say that this is not a criticism in any way of DBT or of Marcia, whose work is fabulous. This is really to do with how we measure things in medical research, including psychiatry, clinical psychology. So treatment is defined as effective when a person no longer has symptoms of the illness. So I think this, I mean, a very clear example would be, for example, depression. So if somebody's, for example, their mood is quite low, they have diminished interest, they have diminished energy, when those things step back up, then we can all more or less say, okay, so you feel like yourself again. That symptom remission in the case of depression is perhaps more intuitive. But for folks who have BPD and co-occurring clinical syndromes, at the end of the treatment, you can have remitted BPD symptoms and still, as some of my participants described it after treatment, they could sometimes feel like life was very flat, or that they didn't quite know who they were once the illness identity was taken away. So really, I mean, it's a huge victory to stop self-harming and to have remitted symptoms, but being symptom-free is not the same thing as having a life experience is worth living. So if we take that, if we sort of start from there, okay, so symptom remission is not the same as a life experienced as worth living, but we're in a system where, because of the way we test new treatments, what we have as a parameter of being effective is symptom remission. What to do then? So this is really kind of a problem related to epistemology, ways of knowing that rely on a symptom or a problem focus. And this really leads to the current study that I'm so thrilled to share with you today. This is a 3-site collaboration study conducted with the overall aim of defining life worth living from those with lived experience. Because I would say probably around 2016, 2017, the research community was like, oh my gosh, symptom remission isn't the same thing as life worth living. Well, what is a life worth living? And then some very well-intentioned and brilliant people sort of said, okay, well, you need to have these things, and sure. Or we can ask people who have walked this path about their experience, because as I had the privilege of seeing in my collaboration with Shado, this is happening in people, and maybe there's more validity and understanding from them about their experience. So that's really the aim of this study. So really, we wanted to capture folks across the illness to wellness spectrum. So there's 3 different cohorts. One from my inpatient, the unit that I'm attached to as a researcher, for folks who are starting inpatient DBT. There's an outpatient cohort for people at the outset of standard DBT. And then the cohort that I'm going to share with you today, their results come from people who have lived experience that I recruited from SHADO, so the Swedish equivalent of Emotions Matter, to reflect about their experiences. So this is the inclusion criteria for recovered individuals who participated in the study. So they needed to have this history of severe and repetitive self-harm and life-threatening behavior alongside a historic diagnosis of BPD. We said BPD and co-occurring PTSD so that folks specifically wouldn't feel excluded, and because that is such a common presentation. Also treatment with dialectical behavior therapy, identifying as recovered for a minimum of 2 years of adult age with the ability to give consent and to speak Swedish or English. So in terms of sample size and the analyses that we did, we relied on thematic analysis, which is really the leaders in the field are Clark and Braun, and they have parameters for approximately how many people to include if you want to reach what they call saturation. So you feel like you explore a concept deeply enough that the meaning that you get is something you start to recognize as something that you've heard before. So in order to answer the scientific questions that were created to understand a life worth living, we planned for a total of 8 study participants in each cohort. But I actually got 9 in the SHADO cohort because it was a voice message. I'd given my phone number as part of recruitment. It was somebody who had a burning desire to be interviewed, and so I did an extra one. So this was sufficient to develop clear themes within qualitative thematic analysis. So our research question, there were a number of them. What does a life worth living actually mean? So in the most recent edition of Professor Linehan's manual, she does talk about life worth living as possibly happening in stage 3 and 4 of DBT. And that is in the manual, but it hasn't been separately manualized the way, for example, some PTSD protocols has, or the fabulous DBT ACEs about exiting the system. The component of life worth living sort of experientially that has not been manualized. So we do know about her ideas about moving from chaos to freedom, and that freedom in relation to having this life worth living. And she also, in the most recent manual, did talk about the possibility of the experience of a deeper sense of connectivity to others and to the universe for those who are spiritual as part of stage 3 and 4. So it's nice. There's a little bit of a framework that comes from Marsha Linehan. And then the rest is a little bit, for the moment, is sort of like areas to be discovered. So life worth living, and folks who are familiar with DBT will recognize this, it really comes during the commitment phase of treatment. So people in therapy are asked to give up self-harm and other self-damaging behaviors in return for the promise that a life feels worth living. And as I am a DBT therapist still, and I recognize this process. And I know that at the beginning of the therapy, it's important to talk about a life experiences worth living while a person is suicidal, because you're hearing people say that they're suicidal. So jumping ahead and saying something like, what about a fabulous life? I understand why life experiences worth living is praised from like a step from 0 if I'm suicidal to 1, but I can imagine that my life will be experiences worth living. But then what happens when someone is no longer suicidal? When somebody has started achieving a life that is experienced as worth living? My question is, isn't it possible that those parameters can also progress, that people can also move into having more, for example, than a life experienced as worth living, as I observed in my colleague in the National Self-Harm Project? So what happens after people aren't suicidal? And I wondered if the promise of a life worth living was enough. Yes. So this incredible SHADO representative that I watched transform over the years of our collaboration, I see that her life really is amazing. She's doing her dream profession. She's happy. She's in love. She has a family. To me, this appears to be more than a life worth living. So I know when I've reflected back to my study participants, like that life that it seems like they're doing, that they're really thriving, that they're really flourishing. It sort of seems to me a little bit beyond life worth living and beyond. So I remember at the beginning of recruiting for the study, I called somebody who I've collaborated with for a number of years and asked him, do you think it would be hard for me to find these participants and people who identified as being recovered for at least 2 years? And this was by email, and he wrote back and within minutes and said he did not think that this would be hard to find at all. Which again, if you sit in the research world and really only follow people shortly after treatment, this is a whole other side that we don't get to see because we don't follow people for long enough. But of course, he knew, and most likely folks in Emotions Matter know that, yes, of course, many people go on to thrive after they experience recovery. So a little bit something different happened for me at this time. When I was thinking about this study, I had the chance to be on parental leave myself, and I spent a lot of that time thinking about this study, thinking about also how we think about what's possible in other people's lives. And I was thinking about the life that I was thinking about bringing into the world too. And it really gave me a chance to think about all of life's opportunities and not just the confines of what we've defined in existing research. That time away, I can say it was a very creative and creatively inspiring time because I wasn't so stuck in my parameters academically. And this reminds me a bit of Zen teaching, sort of this Zen beginner's mind, that through dropping the expert mind and learning as a beginner, that this is an important practice. And that beginner's mind is dropping our expectations and preconceived ideas about something and seeing things with an open mind, fresh eyes, just like a beginner, which I thought was beautiful. And I put the link up for that web page there at the bottom of the slide here. So if you sort of think past what we know is possible into what we would wish for somebody, and you imagine what you might want for a brand new life. And I think I will just move through these because I would love to be able to interact with you, but I can only see my big screen. So even if people react on their screens, I won't be able to see, but I'll put these up. So if you think about a recipe for a brand new life, perhaps you might want happiness and joy, some excitement and fun, a sense of adventure and magic, experiencing love between people and other living creatures, feeling love for one's life and for one's experience, fulfilling dreams, contributing positively to the world, feeling visible, valued, precious, and loved. So then when I went back to work, I felt that the idea as a life worth living as an end point for therapeutic potential, for me, that felt very limited and possibly limiting. I have deep respect for all of the hard work it takes to develop a treatment and to do RCT trials, these randomized controlled trials. They are really a lot of work for many, many years. But it gets back to this issue of symptom remission as a way of understanding whether treatment has been effective or not, which doesn't speak to really what it feels like to have a life that feels like it's flourishing, for example. So I was also deeply grateful to be privileged with the experience of working with my shadow representative, which is what helped me to understand that so much more than life worth living only is possible. And so here, that's sort of the backdrop to the results of the recovered cohort. I collected data. This was a very nice thing to do during the pandemic. So between November 2020 and 2021, I did interviews by telephone, and I created the interview protocol, of course, in collaboration with my friends at Shado, as well as with my other co-therapists who were doing interviews as well in the other cohorts. And I had permission to audio record our interviews. And really, there was quite a range of between 30 and 78 minutes. Because some people just gave me these gorgeous nuggets and I had to understand a little bit better. Like I remember research participants who sort of said, well, I just stopped hating myself and then things move forward. So to sort of ask, okay, so how did you do that? What was involved in that? So that's why there was quite a bit of variability in the time. Some people, there's permission in thematic analysis to really delve into the information that you have so that you can really deeply understand it. So the interviews were conducted, two were conducted in person and the rest by telephone. And any potentially identifying information was removed. In terms of demographics of our participants, they identified as women who ranged from 24 to 41. There was quite a bit of diversity in sexual orientation, with only one person identifying as heterosexual. Educational attainment was fairly high. And all participants reported being recovered, and there was a range of between 2 to 10 plus years, and all reported having a life that they experienced as worth living. In terms of living situation, most lived in large cities with their partner, two children for whom they were responsible, one with children for whom they were not responsible, and just over half the sample were employed, and the rest had student loans as their primary source of income. And all of the participants were Swedish, identifying as a Swedish and European ethnicity. So thematic analysis, the different stages of conducting that analysis are in the top part of our slide here, in terms of going through the interviews and doing the actual analysis that we conducted on the semantic level, which is just to say that we followed what the participants said exactly, rather than interpreting their interviews during the analysis of interview data. So are you ready for the results? There were 4 main themes and 13 sub-themes. Oh, and there's the paper, and I think the paper is actually linked to my bio for the event for today. And I will go through each of these main themes and just take out a couple of nuggets, some quotations that really beautifully made up some of the sub-themes that comprise these main themes. So the first one, that family or close people helped recovery and to create a life worth living. The second, that to have the identity as recovered. The third main theme was identify as healthy and beyond. And the fourth main theme was becoming well is a long process. So in terms of theme 1, that family or close people helped recovery and to create a life worth living. This is sub-theme 1, that family or close people helped recovery. And this participant says, I probably prefer to be able to do like this interview, to be able to show, and she laughs, or like give them an experience of recovery, kind of like this. It is one thing to like hear things sometimes, no matter what you say, it happens. It's just words and they only go so far. But if I were to say something like that, I would probably say that it is so heavenly worth it to find a way to go through this treatment process, and that it will be shitty, but that it is still like so much better. And that even if it feels like it's completely impossible, you can do it. And she goes on to say, and that you're not alone sounds so cliche, but that you should not have to do it alone either. There are so many to take support from and like to hold hands with along the journey's walk. Something like that. In terms of family or close people helping to create a life worth living, participant 2 said, now I'm trying to take care of what I have, to value what I have, to make sure that those parts of my life know I value them. So with my wife and son and family, I'm very careful to show how much I like them and how much they mean. At work, it's a little harder to be able to do that. But for myself, I focus very much on the fact that I'm grateful that I've been given this opportunity. So there's much more to keep and value what I have, because I have so much that if I did not get more, it is still a life worth living. Moving on to the main theme number 2, identifying as recovered. This participant 2 says, yes, I probably don't want to say 100% recovered, but I still think I'm very close. So if I'm going to take it as a percentage, I probably actually want to say that I'm enough. 90% recovered. I personally feel that way. In terms of being recovered, not being a static condition, this participant said, I definitely see myself as a person who's recovered from a mental illness and so on. But on the other hand, I do not see mental illness as a static condition. So since I do not see it as a static condition, I don't think it's so relevant to talk about it from the aspect of whether you have been diagnosed or what symptoms you have. I think it can fluctuate with time. That's not what's interesting to me. But when I look from the inside, I see myself as more resilient. So I would describe alongside my recovery as that I have more resilience to face what life gives me, whether it is mental illness or other challenges in life. In terms of main theme number 3, identifying as healthy and beyond, this sub-theme, feeling very far from mental illness, a quote that epitomized that sub-theme was, and now my whole identity is, after all, it has nothing to do with it, that I've been ill or something. It's almost as if it has not happened. I'm pretty good at understanding other people. I'm empathetic, and I'm pretty good at comforting people who feel bad and trying like this. So in that way, it's probably still part of my identity that I can understand people who feel bad and stuff. But so it's definitely not the way I see myself now. And then another sub-theme from this main theme of identifying as healthy and really beyond is that inner work to develop strength and belief, self-belief. And the bolded word here, it's this fabulous Swedish word, självförtroende, which is, so it's one more than belief. It's almost like faith. And it's about faith in oneself. So I think it was self-belief eller självförtroende, but I believed so much more in myself that I believed I could actually do it. Before, while ill, my bad self-esteem, my bad feelings, I saw so heavenly much. I was so heavenly mean to myself mentally. I thought I was very useless, and I told myself I was useless. And I think so I really believed in it. I thought I was useless and no one would ever like me. And I would never be able to do anything. And so it was more like I broke my legs for myself because I felt bad and didn't believe in myself. And then when I started on feeling better and realized I might not be as bad as I thought and kept telling myself that I was. I may not be better than anyone else, but maybe not worse either. Maybe I can try and someone else will decide if I'm good enough rather than I myself have disqualified myself from the beginning. Then I dared to give it a try, a real try. The joy when it works and goes well. You feel so strong then. There was also a sub-theme under this main theme of identifying as healthy and beyond in terms of cultivated wisdom through meaning and perspective. This participant said, I have a pretty high ability to complete things, and that, what should you call it, to kind of enforce things. And that when I was sick, it made me extremely good at trying to feel bad, if you understand what I mean, to push things to their extreme. But it has also been a gift in me when I felt better. So I do not mean that you do it consciously or so, but I had no other options then. I couldn't live my life. I had no tools to live my life in any other way. But I had the resources that I used to destroy myself and my own life as well. I could slowly but surely work on it to become something else. And I often think that many people have that same ability. So she was talking about using the determination and the power that she'd used to harm herself and to she had an eating disorder as well, to use that power and determination and turn it towards building a life slowly, 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 to use that as a tool in a way to enforce creating a life in which she cultivated well-being. Life beyond dreams. How fabulous. And I think my life is beautiful, or that life is beautiful. So that is that I stop in nature, or that when I pet an animal, when I'm with my child and such, and we have an expression, my child can say like this, now you have tears like this again of joy. And it has been my life that I can actually think that is fantastically nice and beautiful, what I get to be part of. And this participant, I remember, she'd been in institutions from her late childhood into her 20s, because she also had a complicated somatic illness as well. So these are not people who had light symptom burdens or special privilege. These are people who had histories of really suffering. And then finally, the last main theme, that becoming well is a long process. And the main sub-theme that I'm highlighting in our presentation today is that it took many years to become more healthy than sick. And as a researcher, you have to kind of make a decision, like, where am I cutting this theme off? It can't be too long, but if it could be longer, what I would add is that it took many years to become more healthy than sick, but once healthy, remained healthy. I'll say a bit more of that in comments here, in the quotes. When I've sought help, I've always been completely honest and shared all I think needs to come out or something. I've never consciously withheld anything for that I do not trust the person or anything like that. But in this therapy, so there were some things that even though I had that intention, so it kind of didn't emerge until maybe 1.5 years into therapy. That I was not aware. I hadn't talked about certain things. So there was probably a value in it being over a longer period of time. But also that I experienced it as if it was more about a little so to dare to meet myself. And another sub-theme was that too short or not adapted or incomplete treatments weren't helpful. So this participant says, I also thought I met care that was very inflexible in meeting me and my needs, because I had care that required different aspects, that the care should collaborate with each other, and they did not. And it was confirmed in me that I was awkward, that I was, as it were, that I was a problem in different ways. And so it was like I got a treatment that was not adapted to me at all. And it did also very much reinforced in me this feeling that, but there must be something wrong with me. So, and that held me back very, very much. So these are the main findings in terms of the main themes. And there were 13 sub-themes with beautiful quotes from my study participants that are in the paper, and that I would love to find a way to publish in full form, find a way to recontact the participants and get permission to do that, because they're beautiful interviews. And from this data, we created a proposed theoretical model depicting the recovery, life worth living, and flourishing process. So I was me and my colleagues, my co-authors and we were careful to use the words that people use themselves. And flourishing, there's not quite that word in Swedish. So in the discussion of our analyses, we used the idea of flourishing to capture this healthy life, this life beyond wildest dreams, this life where people described feeling that they were in love with their life in times, nobody all the time, but that there were these moments of that. And in terms of time after treatment, if we take a look, I would say that at first, I would say it's important we meet the assumption of symptom remission in terms of time after treatment, but we didn't measure it. So that was an assumption that we made. But something we definitely asked people about was all the rest of it. So recovery, life experiences worth living, a good, and then a healthy and sort of this life that we characterized as flourishing. And if this is these are overlapping constructs because many people felt they had a life worth living before they necessarily identified as recovered when they were recounting their history. Other people felt like recovery is sort of not so relevant. It's been so long since they were in treatment. They feel like this is something that they've really quite left behind, although of course they recognize that's a part of their history. So in time and years, I would say that 1 to 3 years for the first 3 circles, symptom, remission, assumed, recovery as they described in a life worth living. Somewhere between 3 and 5 years, between a life experiences worth living and a good life, and then a healthy and flourishing life for those who were sort of 5 years and past since they completed treatment and began with the identity of being recovered. So our conclusions is really that this study is an advantage of a multi-year collaboration with Shadow. So an organization just like Emotion Matters here in Sweden, it was only because I saw it myself that I knew that this was possible. And I would say this is really because research studies, there's so much to do within these research studies that when you're finished, you're very keen to push out your results when the treatment is over, which is often when we stop measuring, or we'll measure for 3, for 6, and 1 year is considered very long to follow people. And I'd really quite get it. I also can understand how some people might not necessarily want to have contact with their treatment team if they feel like they've really moved past this. They don't want to perhaps keep thinking about things. There's a lot of reasons why. But I also think that this is the unique role that organizations like Emotions Matter, like Shada, it's a key nickel like role for folks who do want to stay involved, who do want to get involved with advocacy, who do want to help understand what's possible and work alongside researchers. So that long-term follow-up, that 10 plus year possibility, it's what allows us to be able to understand how things really look that much longer. So I know my study participants are amazing, but they tell me that they're not unique. So that makes me think, again, we need to follow folks for longer, because for me, this seems so amazing and fantastic. And I feel like they're saying like, yes, yes, and there's more of us that probably we need to hear about in research. So working more closely and longer term with organizations of folks with lived experience, that I think for me, that the shutters of my mind was blown open by that, seeing what is possible over the very long term. And that recovery, in terms of conclusions from the study, that recovery and life worth living are separate but interwoven constructs. And here, just as I'd estimated from the model, it's about 5 years of a life worth living in the absence of major setbacks. And one of our participants had a major setback, including probably would have been like a depressive episode, but not back into full-blown symptoms, not back into self-harm or needing specialized treatment. No, she had a major setback, but it didn't undo her sense of recovery or life worth living. It kept her from having this linear trajectory. But when is life linear? So that's something I think is important to emphasize, that you can get to flourishing. Sure, some people more quickly, some people longer term, but that it's just not, it's not necessarily a linear path. So existing treatment, clinical research likely doesn't follow people long enough to capture these outcomes, and that this is an understudied area in collaboration with lived experience organizations. So future directions, I've finished the analysis from the outpatient DBT cohort, and we're writing up that paper now. And the data is all collected from the inpatient cohort as well. So stay tuned. I always share my research when it gets published on my LinkedIn page. So you'll see it there. And I need to, of course, acknowledge the people at Shadow who helped me with recruitment and for being fabulous people who are involved in all of the research that we do, as well as my colleagues at the different centers who helped with interviewing the other cohorts, and my interviewers, and the grant that we got to do this research. And I see we have just enough time, I think. I would love to share some inspiration from a comedian, a nice lighthearted touch. Comedian Kevin James Thornton, and there's his email. He does not identify as someone who has lived experience of borderline personality disorder, but he is someone who talks very openly about having lived experience of difficulty accepting himself. And what struck me in the video I'm about to share with you is he talks about how easy it is to describe feeling good and how hard it is to describe feeling good. So I will share with you his video now, and then we'll open up for questions. So let's see.
That's a thought I have a lot lately, and it makes me really grateful because I have spent so much of my life not feeling good. Most of you know my story at this point. Sorry if I'm a little bit of a broken record lately. My teenage years were so full of guilt and shame. I have memories of sitting in my car in the church parking lot after church and just bawling my eyes out because I had a crush on some random guy in my youth group, and just sitting there feeling so guilty and dirty. And then I spent all of my 20s and 30s trying to be things that I am not, forcing myself into spaces that I did not fit, and just being so incredibly hard on myself. Why am I just sitting here by the trash can? Time has its way with you. Do you know what I mean? I just wore myself out, and at some point I was like, this is my life. What am I doing? Time has a way of just like clarifying what matters and what doesn't. There's some kind of deep letting go that has to happen. It did for me anyway. And it's not something I've ever been able to quite put into words. It's super simple and super hard to describe. So instead, I will tell you my favorite poem by Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things.
Be in my vlog?
In your vlog? I look like Tony.
What's your name?
Thanks. Kevin.
Kevin,
Yep.
Yeah, my dad look like Tony Stark.
what you doing, Kevin?
I'm making a vlog too.
Oh, what's up? Hi guys, welcome to the channel. Subscribe to his channel. Subscribe to his channel.
Like, subscribe.
Subscribe.
Follow. Well, subscribe, follow the same thing.
Wonderful. Sophie, thank you so much for that amazing presentation. We're now going to transition over to the Q&A, and we've had a couple questions come in. So let's start with this question. Somebody asked, can you speak to those of us who have such a hard time knowing what it's like to feel like ourselves? The symptom I struggle with the most by far is having an unclear or self-image. I trust others living with BPD can relate. Thank you so much for any insights you can offer.
Oh, that's such a good question. And it reminds me actually of one of the interviews that I did. And I just want to come back and make sure I understand. It's about understanding oneself.
Yes.
Yeah. Understand and feeling well, or just oneself.
Yeah. So knowing for people who have difficult times, knowing what it's like to feel like ourselves and the shifting self-image.
Yes. And that's good. That is the interview that I'm thinking about. Someone who went away for treatment, and she was quite young. She went to a different part of the country to do her treatment, and it was a while. She did stage 1 and stage 2 DBT, so it was closer to 2 years. And then she came back, and the former friend group, she didn't have that much in common. She wasn't the person that she was before, and didn't want to necessarily go back to that. And she talked about a sense of not knowing, the sense of kind of experiential flatness, and wondering, well, then who am I, And for many of our participants talked about getting a little bit out into the world, just trying things just a little bit to find out what they liked. So for this person, it was about getting involved with Shado and meeting like-minded people and realizing, oh my gosh, so this experience that's been such a separator of me from other people, everyone here has this. This is actually a strength, and finding community and lightheartedness. So Shado was a big piece for her. It's actually through Shado that she found employment too. And then another study participant, she got involved in something here called green rehab. Is someone who had a similar struggle. And green rehab here is that you go into the community. It's a greenhouse, and you plant little things, little green things that grow. I'm missing the word. You plant flowers, you develop seedlings, and she described, because she also had ADHD, she didn't have so much self-concept that she could show up. She'd been in psychiatry for so long, but that she had a place in the community, people who were expecting her, that she was expected to show up. She wasn't sure she could do that, but then she saw she could show up every week, and she enjoyed herself. And then she thought, well, maybe I can start working 25%, and that was okay. And then working 50%. And so it seems that first having maybe the self-belief or that faith in yourself to take that first step out into the world and letting the world sort of organically unfold. That's what I loved about the comedian's video there, really allowing sort of the organic unfolding of nature of life to sort of happen to you, to sort of let go of control and needing to know how it's going to go a little bit within a safe way, and just to see what happens when you go out into the world a little bit. That's what I would say from the interviews that relates best back to that question, and it's a good one. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So just because we have 4 minutes, I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions, and I see some similarities in the questions coming in. So one question that's come in quite a bit is some curiosity around the decision of interviewing only women, and some clarity around that as it pertains to this study.
So it wasn't a decision. It was about that I knew that I had to do 8 interviews, and it was that these are the ones who contacted me. These are the people who contacted me. And so basically it was about getting informed consent. It was also the pandemic, so I understood that people had kind of a lot going on in their lives aside from participating in interviews. So I was very happy to hear from my interviews. It's a definite limitation. We had very nice diversity in sexual orientation, but the gender was not diverse. It would have. I wish that circumstances could have been different, and we could have specifically. I think if I did this study again, I would find a way of recruiting in a way that would be a little bit more diverse. Also in terms of ethnicity, that everybody, I mean, it is a little bit that way in some parts of Sweden, that people are Swedish from Sweden, but in other places not. So this was a bit of a learning experience for me.
Absolutely. Thank you. And just the last question, we're sorry to everyone that we couldn't get to all of the questions, but this question came in and it says, after going into remission and since BPD symptoms can reemerge at any moment, do you know if any of the people in your study had symptoms reemerge, and if so, when?
Yeah, and I think it was study participant number 3. Remember the one who said that she thought that asking about diagnostics wasn't that important because these things, they do fluctuate so much and life isn't static. So I kind of loved her. She was very opinionated, which I appreciated. She should be. She's the expert with lived experience, saying, this is not interesting in terms of diagnoses. What's interesting is your increased ability to deal with what comes. So she's the one who talked about resilience. So she could in periods, she had a lot of adversity actually since becoming well. And it was that she focused, I think, if I remember correctly, she was focusing less on what was emerging and more in terms of what do I have in terms of my own resilience to meet with, be it either a slip, if I have a major depressive episode, or if I slip a little back into some eating disordered behavior. If that happens, the fact I don't crash, their dips, I come back more quickly and I have more resilience. And also understanding that it's to do with life's challenges too, not just to do with symptoms. And she was critical, which I appreciated. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we will wrap up here. Thank you so much, Sophie, for joining us today and for sharing your incredible research and insight with us. There was a couple comments as well, just saying thank you for your presentation today and your research. It was lovely having you. And yeah, thank you so much for everyone who joined this talk today as well.
Thank you for the invitation. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Thank you.